In this video, I'll show you how to take a model from Clayxels inside of Unity, bake down the polygons, UV texture it, re-import it into Unity, and make an actual game asset out of it. This process will take you from about 1,000,000 polygons all the way down to 10,000 for this particular model. So let's get started.
Right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a clay container. The container will hold all of our clay objects. I'm going to set the detail to 100, add a cube, and scale it up to almost the bounds of the clay container so I can get the most resolution possible. Here you can see I clipped the bounds and sort of disappeared. Turn on the gizmo so you can see the actual clay container. It's a faint outline. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the clay container a bit bigger so I can do some Boolean operations. You don't want to use the scale like I'm doing here. What you want to do is change the bound scale like this. That'll give us room to add some more objects and do some Booleans later. And so I'm going to do some rounding of the cube, get a cool rounded corner look. Duplicate the cube with Control D, move it down. I'll scale it up a bit. I'm going to get rid of all the roundness on this cube because I use it to cut the top of our crate off. To cut, you change the blend to anything negative. Oh, we cut off the bottom. Now I'm going to duplicate the entire container. Make the bottom of the crate. All I need to do is move this cutting cube up. I'm going to rename them just so I keep the workspace tidy. Crate top and crate bottom. I don't want these two pieces to be too close together because when I export to mesh, I don't want any kind of artifacting. And we can change the crate gap or this top gap inside of our 3D application later. So I'm just going to leave it somewhat large for now. Alright, I'm rotating so the X is pointing forward. Anytime you do some complex modeling and you want to mirror, you want to do it along the X because Clayxels only has mirror X. And mirror this cube, rotate it on a 45, and we're going to cut into this. A little bit wider. Go back between local pivot and global, just depending on how I need to move the object. I'll go back and forth a couple times, you'll see it happen. Alright, so now it's cutting in, making room for like a label of some sort. I'm going to try to taper off the edges of the cut. So rotate this box. Anytime you see a box just magically appear, I'm using Control D to duplicate the game object. Slide it over, kind of give it a little taper off look. Go ahead and duplicate that one. Change the Z. That looks pretty good for now. Make sure both those are mirrored X. Now I'm going to make a label for just a little raised spot in the middle to show the label. Depending on how you texture this could be like a screen on a sci-fi crate or something like that. Just want it barely raised and centered, mirrored across the X. Looks good. Alright, now I'm going to cut a hole in the top. I'll use this to embed some handles into the crate lid. Just changing the amount of blend just to get it to round off. I like this round, smooth kind of look for this crate. Gonna make some sticks here. Turn it on a 45. Mirror it across the X. Position, scale them however. I think that looks pretty good. I'll duplicate that, move it across by changing the Z from negative to a positive, and it'll jump across, and then also flip the rotation. Blend them in a little bit. That's one of the best parts about Clayxels is the blending. So use that. I use that kind of heavily. Make some handles here. Center it. Scale it out a bit. Raise it up. Hit with Control D. Change the Z-axis from a negative to a positive and watch it jump over. Alright. I'm going to cut some little details into the corner of my box. Or into the crate. Just trying to get it centered perfectly. Scale just the way I want it. Blend it in a little bit. Round it off. Mirror it across the X. Duplicate it and change that Z-axis again. Boom. Alright. Now I'll make some side handles. So same thing, I'm going to cut into the side. Get it positioned just right. I'll add a cylinder. Direction. Move it on over. Up. This is one of the cool parts about Clayxels is you can just scale and move and not worry about destroying mesh. And you can just look at it and see if it looks like the way you want it to. Just play around. Alright, so I'm going to mirror over that cut by duplicating the box and changing the Z-axis. And I'll do the same thing for the handle. Duplicate. Change that Z-axis from a negative to a positive. And I should have a handle on both sides. Good. Happy with that. Start on the bottom. First thing I'll do is I'll cut a relief into the front of the box. Kind of want to give it a gas can look. Or a fuel container of some sort. Roundiness. Make a little stick. I'm going to make an X in the middle of this relief. This one. And then duplicate, flip the rotation. Sides. That mirror X is working. Alright, now on the side here, near the bottom, I'm going to give the bottom some detail. I'm going to have some cuts. Mirror X to make the cut the exact same distance from the center cut. I'm going to select both of these with the picker. If you hit P and hold Shift and click another object, clay object, it'll pick both of them. So what I did was duplicate it, again using that trick of flipping the Z-axis from negative to positive. It's on both sides. Select these. I'm actually going to use the hierarchy here, and I'm going to turn up the blending a bit to round them off a little bit. Now I'm going to put some detail into the side here. Some like, I don't know, or some detail just so it's not so square. Do this with math if you wanted to, if you wanted it perfect, but I kind of just go by eye. Goes over. Alright. Round them off a bit with some blending. Copy that cut from the top. I'm going to copy that down to the bottom of the crate. You can actually copy clay objects from container to container. It's really handy. Just going to mirror it over to the X, and I should have it on all four corners. You're going to go to the bottom of this crate some detail, because in my game the robots are going to be pushing this crate around and it's going to flip over. You're going to see the bottom sometimes. So not a whole lot of detail, but just give it a little something. I think the crate is done. What I need to do now is I'm going to freeze the clay into mesh. You want to make sure this name is set, and you'll see the mesh pop over in the left. I'm going to hide the top. I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom. Make sure that name is set, freeze the mesh. Hide that bottom. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an empty game object, call it crate. I'm going to parent those two meshes, or put them inside that crate game object. Set everything to 0. And it's pink right now because it doesn't have a material. I'll fix that here. Material. Just call it clay. Just drag it. Oh yeah, let's put this inside the crate. Center zeroed out. We'll drag the crate over to create a prefab. So now I have a crate prefab here that I could use in my game. But I'm actually going to, in a later step, decrease the polygon count because you'll see that it's very, very high right now. What I'm going to do is go into the package manager, go into the Unity registry, and I'm going to look for export. So export. You may have to check advanced and go show preview packages. Use this FBX importer. So install it. This will take a second. Okay, now that it's installed, I'm going to click create game object, export to FBX. We want to change the format type to binary. so we can open it in Blender. And that's it. Next step will be Blender. In Blender here, we're going to import the FBX we just exported. Our crate. It's going to take a second because there's a ton of mesh, and you'll see in a second how many there are. How many polygons. So nearly looks like 800,000 faces. You can see it's so dense. What I'm going to do is do a smart UV project to UV unwrap this. At its defaults. Click OK. This will take a while. And then you can see it's unwrapped. Do the same thing for the bottom. Tab into edit mode, select all the faces, smart UV project, unwrap. Okay, it's all unwrapped. I'm going to tab out. I'm going to select both of these. What I'm going to do is do an export to OBJ because the next tool we're going to use only uses OBJ. I'll make sure I'm selection only. Objects as OBJ objects. Click OK. It's going to take a bit to export out this nearly million faces. Going. Done. Alright, our next tool is called Instant Meshes. We're going to go ahead and open up that high poly OBJ that we created in Blender. It's going to take a second because of how many faces there are. Smooth looking model. Try to bring down this face count quite a bit. We'll leave it at 25 and go ahead and solve it and show you what it will look like. It's pretty good. Still though, 25,000 faces is a lot for a game object, especially the scale that I'm going to have this game object at in my game. So I'm going to bring it down probably to right around 9. Go ahead and solve it. We'll see what it looks like in mesh. It looks very similar to the 20,000, so I'm going to keep it here at 9. There are some problems, some errors like that right there. We're going to fix that with the comb tool. What the comb tool does is allow you to kind of straighten out the mesh, kind of tell the program where you want the mesh to go. It takes a little playing with, especially trying to draw with a mouse. If you had a tablet, this would be really cool. Pretty happy with that line, so let's take a look at it. You can see we've already, with just 2 little combs, we've already kind of fixed this side here. There are some other abnormalities here. We're going to try to clean that up as well. What I like to do is I'll try on the inside of a cut or try on the outside of a cut to see what looks better. Go ahead and solve that, and you can see here that definitely the outside of the cut made this one look better. So try to fix this bottom part. That looks a lot better. The edges are nice and straight. Little bow there. Let's see if we can straighten that out. And we did, but it kind of messed up the top and the bottom. Let's try it on the inside of the box. Cut. It's pretty good. It still has a little bit of bow. I might just live with it. We are going to bake the high poly texture down onto this lower poly mesh, so we should have nice details in the end. One thing I do want to fix is these edge cuts. Smooth right down the crease. It's much better. Let's look at the mesh. Oh yeah, the resulting mesh looks a lot better. Alright. It's pretty good, but let me try to add a crease, see what happens. I straightened everything out. Okay, look for any kind of weirdness. You could spend a lot of time on this part of the process, just trying to straighten out your topology. Said if you had a tablet and a pen, this would probably be the perfect place to use it. That one's kind of funky, so let's see what we can do about that. Kind of repeat this process over and over until you're happy with the results. It takes some practice because you have to sort of envision what it will look like with the baked high poly mesh on top of it. Solve it. That looks pretty straight. That's probably about as good as we're gonna get it. Right here. So, yeah, topology's a little messed up. And you'll find that sometimes when you're straightening out the topology on one side of the model, it'll mess up the topology on the other side, and you'll just have to redo it. Careful there. Better looking. Alright. Try to fix that wave right there in the bottom. Oh yeah, see, adding that one line straightened out everything. Also find like the distance away from the edge that you draw the line plays a factor in the strength of the process. Try inside the cut. Let's try to straighten this side out a little bit. This is where I really wish they had a straight line tool. Top's kind of wobbly. See if we can throw down some lines and fix that. Sometimes I'll draw multiple lines without hitting solve. Speed up this process because it can take a while. It's bad. Try drawing the line on the inside of this cut and see what happens. Closer to that crease. It's a little bit better. I draw a straight line right here. See if we can't fix that. Better. To again, it's hard to tell how much of this will show up in your final bake because you're putting that high poly on top of this. So try not to get lost in this process because you could be here for ever. Go ahead and save it. I'm going to call it low poly, create low poly. I'm going to even give it the poly count, so we'll say 9K. Save. Alright, and we'll head back to Blender. Back in Blender, we're going to import our low poly mesh. You can see we started at 812,000 faces, which is a ton. Go to import, OBJ. Get that low poly crate back in here. Alright, see how fast it imports? Even faster than the high poly. And it doesn't look so good. And that's because when we exported our mesh from instant meshes, it marked all edges sharp. So what we're going to do is go into edit mode, select all edges, go up to edge and clear sharp. Out of edit mode, now you can see it's more rounded and kind of lost some of its detail. Again, we're going to bake the detail into the low poly mesh inside Substance Painter. So we're going to smart UV project to get the UVs of the new low poly mesh. Good. Still dense, but not as dense as the 800,000 face UV. Back to the origin. Hide the high poly crate. Select the low poly crate and go ahead and export that as an OBJ. We're going to export right over the low poly. This is the same one as the low poly with UVs. Now we're inside Substance. We're going to open up that low poly crate. Let's see, inside assets, there it is. K1. Go ahead and hit open. And you can see it's kind of a blobby mess. We're going to fix that by baking the mesh real quick. Textures. So inside there, we're going to pick our high poly mesh. This is the one with a million faces. Okay, with everything selected, click bake. This will take a second. It's going to go through, bake in all the details from our high poly into our low poly, and make it instantly look better. So now this looks like the high poly mesh, but it's actually still the low poly 9000 face mesh. What I do from here, once it's all looking good, is I'm going to drop a smart material on, like painted scratches or something. Go over to my smart materials, type in paint, find one that looks decent. I might try a few different ones. And it uses all that baked in information from our high poly to know where to put the scratches. It's actually really cool. Change the paint color real quick. I want to go with like an army green or maybe like a halo green. What's really cool about this is that you can use the little picker tool to pick a color from an image. Trying to find a cool green. That. Some dirt to it. Just kind of play with these smart materials to get the look I'm looking for. Put some metal texture underneath. Mask to paint away the green. Wherever I paint black will show through the layers. And so like on this handle, there probably should be zero paint because it's been picked up so many times. So I'm going to brush away the paint. Kind of give it a nice, clean, worn look. Black mask, and then I'll paint on this one with white. Let's make a little label right here that has a warning on it. Rough out a rectangle, fill it in. Sharpen the edges a little bit so it's not so fuzzy looking. Then I'll find a scratch and I'll start scratching away at the label so it's not perfect. It's because it's seen better days. So I'm going to add a fill layer. And this is going to be for the text that's on the label. So I'm going to make it black. Trying to make it look more like ink. It's pretty good. I'm going to add a black mask and then I'll paint with white. But I'm going to use a stencil on my brush. So, brush, click stencil. And I'm looking for like a hazard sign or a warning sign. Okay, so with the stencil selected, you hit S and use your mouse to position it correctly and scale it, rotate it, and such. Once you have it positioned, you can just start painting on it and it will. And so there we go. Radioactive sign. I'll do the same thing. This time I'll type in warning. Some warning text on here. And you can make your own stencils. I'm just using the ones that came with it. Speed. Warning. I'll do the same thing for the other side. Polygon fill tool here. It does have a downside. It seems like whenever you do the polygon fill tool, it fills the mesh on the other side of the object. See that later. I'll have to fix that. And adding some scratches. Up. Same thing with the stencils here. Printed label. I'm not too worried about it being exactly symmetrical. Good. And you can see those polygon fills that projected through. I'm not sure if there's a way to turn that off. If there is, leave me a comment. I would love to know. So, handles, they're going to be worn out just like the other handles. So I'm going to paint on the mask to remove some of that green paint. Try a couple different scratch brushes. It's pretty good. Good there. I thought I was going to increase the scratches on that X pattern, but I kind of like it is. Check the lighting. Go to export textures. Now I've made my own Unity export here. I will try to find a link to the video that showed me how to do it, and I'll link it in the description below. My export has some customizations that allow it to have more maps. So we have normal, albedo, metallic, even though I don't have anything emitting any light. I'm going to export it into their own folder, call it textures. Nearly done. So export, take a few seconds, and we'll see you in Unity. Back inside Unity, I'm going to hide our high poly crate prefab and our low poly object obj. So bring that in, and it looks terrible again, right? We got to create the material for it. What I'm doing is I'm taking the create material and I'm dragging over the different channels. The metallic channel, albedo, normal, such. I'll put it on the crate so we can see what it looks like. Smoothness. It's usually good around 50% or 0.5. Starts looking really good when we add in the normal map. Add almost a million polygons, and now 9,000 of them. So it's just lighting and getting the scene set up. But now you have a 9,000 polygon game object that came from a million polygon game object. And it won't slow your performance down, even if you go to something like mobile. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. Hope you have some tips and tricks for me. If you do, leave them in the comments below, and I really appreciate it. Thanks.